Alright guys, so now that we have our Bootstrap UI complete, now we're going to start to add our JavaScript. So first thing we want to do is listen on this submit button. So we're going to go ahead, let's put a comment in here, we'll just say listen for submit. So we're going to say document dot, I'm going to use get element by ID, but you could just as well use query selector, and that form has an ID of loan form. Alright, we want to add an event listener. We want to listen for submit, and then once that is submitted, we want to call a function called calculate results. Okay, so now we want to create that function. And we want to pass in our event parameter here, and since it's a form submit, we want to prevent the default behavior. So we'll say prevent default. All right, and then just to test it out, let's do console.log. And I'm just going to say calculating. All right, so now if I go over here and hit F12, open my console and hit the button, we get calculating. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to grab all the stuff from the UI that we need. So I'm just going to say UI variables. So we're going to need all of these form fields. So they all have IDs. So we're going to use get element by ID. So let's grab amount. Whoops, I forgot to name the variable. So const amount equals. Now it's up to you how you want to name your variables. A lot of times people will do something to signify that this is part of the UI. So what I do sometimes is just put UI in front of them like this. Now I'm trying to stay away from personal preference and conventions that I use, because it's personal to me and I don't know if you guys want to use it. So I'm trying to keep things very generic in terms of convention and patterns and stuff like that. Some people will use a $sign. Usually that's when you use jQuery, just to show that it's a jQuery variable. But you can also use it like this just because it's part of the DOM. Some people will use L, like EL, for element, or they'll put it at the back like L or something like that. All right, but we're just going to use just generic names. So we have the amount. We're also going to want the interest. So there's an ID of interest. We also want the years. All right, so these three are these three fields right here. All right, we also want these fields. So we have one called monthly payment, monthly dash payment. So we'll call this variable monthly payment. We have total payment. And we have total interest. So now that we have all of our UI variables, we want to actually do the calculations. All right, so I had to actually look up some of these calculations. Some of them I really don't understand, but I'm just basically putting the formulas that I looked up into code. All right, so first thing we'll do here is create a principal. Now, principal is actually the amount, this right here, except this is just pointing to the input. We need the value, so we're going to say const principal. Now, not only do we want it as the value, but we want it as a float, okay, as a decimal. So we're going to run it through parse float. Remember that? That'll turn it into a decimal. So we want to pass in amount dot value. Okay, we're taking amount, which is this input field, and we're getting the value. We're turning it into a decimal or a float. All right, we also want to create a variable here called calculated interest. Okay, so this is going to be the interest value as a float. So parse float, interest dot value, so whatever's put in that form, and then we want to divide by 100 and divide by 12. All right, that'll give us our calculated interest. Now we also want the calculated payments. All right, so calculated payments is going to be the years wrapped in parse float. So years dot value, and then we just want to times it by 12. All right, so this gives us the principal, the calculated interest, and the calculated payments. Now we want to compute the monthly payments. All right, so for that, I'm going to create a variable called x. We're going to set this to math.pow, which gives us a power. And then we're going to say 1 plus calculated interest. And then the second parameter here will be calculated payments. All right, so this formula here, we want to take, and then we want to create another variable called monthly. And we want to set this to, we're going to put some parentheses here for order of operations, and then say principal times whatever that x value is times calculated interest. All right, and then we want to go outside of the parentheses and we want to divide, set another set of parentheses and say x minus 1, just like that. All right, so that is going to give us our monthly payment. Now once it does this calculation, we want to check to see if this monthly value is actually a finite number. Okay, and there's a method in JavaScript we can use called isFinite. All right, so that's what we're going to use to do our validation. So we're going to put an if else here. So we're going to say if is finite, and we're going to wrap monthly. Okay, so if it's finite, then what we want to do is just display our results in these fields. So remember this one here, monthly payment, has an ID up here. We set it to monthly payment. So we'll say monthly payment dot value. That's how we insert something in that field. And we're going to set it to monthly. All right, now we want this to have decimal points. And remember, numbers have a method called toFixed, where you can set the number of decimals that you want, and we want 2. Okay. Next thing we're going to want is the total payment value. So this right here. So we're going to say total payment dot value, and we want to set that to a set of parentheses, and then in here we're going to say monthly. So we want to take monthly times the calculated payments. Okay, monthly times calculated payments, and then we also want our 2 decimal places. So we're going to say toFixed, and then pass in a 2. So that'll give us our total payment. All right. The last thing we want is the total interest. So let's say total interest dot value equals, and then in here we're going to set some parentheses. We're going to set another set of parentheses for the order of operations, and we want to do monthly. Whoops. So we want monthly times the calculated payments. All right, and then we want it minus the principal. All right, so we'll say minus principal. Okay, and then we just want that toFixed because we want our 2 decimal places. Okay, so that should do it. Now, in the else, if this isn't finite, that means that something went wrong. Something, they didn't enter enough info or something like that. We're going to want to show that error, but for now, we're just going to console.log. And we'll say, I don't know, we'll just say, please check your numbers. Obviously, we want this to show in the UI, not the log, but just for now, just to test things out, we're going to do it this way. So let's go ahead and save, and let's try it out. So let's say a loan amount for, let's say, $5,000. Interest, we'll say 5%. Years to repay, 1 year. Calculate, and there we go. So that seems to be right. So our monthly payment would be $428.04. Total payment would be this. And then total interest, of course, if it's an initial loan of $5,000 and then we're paying back 5136.45, obviously the interest is 13645. All right, so our calculations seem to be working correctly. Now what we want to do is display an error if things don't work correctly. So if we were to just say calculate, you'll see down here we get please check your numbers, because this is running, but we want to display a nice error. Now there's a few ways you could do this. You could just put the div inside here and hide it initially and then just show it, but we're gonna use the create element method from the document object, and we're going to just basically build the alert from JavaScript rather than just showing it, which I think is a better way to do things, and it's all stuff that we've already learned. All right, so what we'll do here is call a function called show error. We're going to build a custom function, and that'll take in a message. So our message will be check, or we'll say please check your numbers. And then down here we'll create that function. All right, so or down here. All right, so show error, that's going to take in a parameter of an error. And then first thing we'll do is create a div. So we'll say const, let's call this error div, and we'll set this to document dot create element, and the element we want to create is a div. Now in Bootstrap, when you want to show an alert, you want to give it a class of alert as well as alert-danger, which will make it red. So let's say add class, so we'll say error div dot class name, and we're going to set that to alert and alert-danger. All right, so next thing we want to do is add the text. So we're going to say create text node and append to div. So we're going to say error div, dot, and then we want to append child. We want to insert something into it, and we want to create a text node. So we say document dot create text node, and then the text is going to be whatever the text is passed in here, so error. All right. Now we want to insert this into the DOM. So I'm going to grab two elements right here. I'm going to say get elements. So we want the card as the parent div, and then we're going to want to put it before this heading right here. So we want that heading as well. So let's say const card and say document dot query selector has a class of card, and then we also want the heading. We'll call this heading. We'll set it to document dot query selector, and that has a class of heading. Okay, so now what we want to do down here is we want to insert error above heading. So we do that by taking the parent, which is the card, and then we want to call insert before. Okay, I don't think we went over this method, but it does just that. You call it on a parent, and then you pass in the element you want to put in, which is the error div, and then you also want to put in whatever you want to insert it before, in this case the heading. Okay, now this should work, so let's actually try it out. So if we go ahead and click calculate with no fields, please check your numbers. Now I don't think it's a good user experience to leave this here like this so that they go back and they enter their numbers. I want this to go away after a certain amount of time. So in JavaScript, in the window object, we have a method called setTimeout where we can have something happen after a certain amount of seconds. So what we're going to do here is we'll say clear error after, let's do 3 seconds. So to do this, we just call set timeout. Okay, set timeout. It's going to take in 2 parameters. One is going to be a function. Now we could write out function like this, or we could call a named function, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create one called clear error, and we want that to happen 3 seconds. Now I'm putting 3,000 here because it's actually milliseconds. So 3,000 milliseconds is 3 seconds. All right, and then we're just going to create the clear error, which is going to be very, very simple, just one line. We're just going to say document.querySelector, and we want to grab the element with the class of alert, and we want to remove it. Okay, so let's go ahead and save, and let's say calculate. 3 seconds goes by, and it disappears. All right, so our calculations are working. Let's just test it one more time. We'll say 10,000. Let's say, I don't know, we'll do 10% with 1 year to repay. All right, so monthly payment would be $879. Total payment would be this, interest. Good. So our calculation works, the error message works. In the next video, we're going to work on the user experience. So we want this to be hidden initially, and then we want that spinner graphic to show for a couple seconds, and then we want this to show. All right, so that's what we'll do in the next video.